and so appreciated. Thank you. I will also tell you that the AUW experience informed the Pletcher Science Fellowships in that, particularly at the University of Minnesota. And these fellowships have no restrictions. I know it's unheard of. And so, like me, some of the women have told me they use it for childcare. Very important and expensive. Some use it for plane tickets to get to Africa, to the Serengeti, where they're doing research. Some use it to buy expensive reagents to try something new. But it all came informed from the fact that there are no restrictions. This is to ease the journey and to get you to the end of your degree. So a doctorate degree automatically confers a seat at the newly minted PhD table. It's a very large table, and you just have a seat. But what is important is, what do you do with the seat when you have it at that table? So how does one use the seat at the table where you are? Well, initially, my doctorate proved to be everything that I could have anticipated. And the experience of writing a proposal and having it reviewed and judged gave me confidence. And I wrote a proposal to NIH for a postdoctoral fellowship. And indeed, I received one. It was fabulous. And so using that, I was able to complete many, many high quality scientific publications. I went to conferences, I was on review committees, everything that anyone could imagine for a newly minted PhD. Long term, the doctorate was a platform for an unorthodox but amazing career. People with my credentials, PhD in biochemistry, a postdoctoral fellowship in biomedical research, at that time it was in blood clotting, didn't make a career at Cargill. For those of you who have never heard of Cargill, Cargill is the largest privately held company in the country, and it is totally involved in agriculture. And when I went there, they were trading grain, they were processing soybeans, processing corn. They had a big meat business, and they were not very big, but still global. So now here I am at Cargill. Who knows what they saw to hire someone who didn't fit in, but I was at a table of all the new hires. So who is at that table of all the new hires? Accountants, traders, engineers. And so what do you do when you're the odd man out? It was pretty clear. I was the odd man out. Well, one of the things you do is you try to use what you bring to help the company. So one of the things that I learned is that I'm particularly good at looking at technical things and translating them into language that accountants, engineers, and traders can understand, and then explaining why these things are important to the company. My seat at the table meant that my job was to explain in the 80s what all this new biotechnology, genetic engineering was going to mean in agriculture. Well, I must have done a pretty good job, because then I got a seat at a smaller table with some people who were not newbies. And so I became the technical director of the soybean processing business. This is a woman who knows something about blood clotting, and now she's dealing with tons of soybeans. Well, what you probably don't know is that then, as today, it takes both the harvest in the northern hemisphere and the harvest in the southern hemisphere of soybeans to actually feed the global population. Now, it's true, most of us don't eat very much in terms of soybeans, but soybeans are the best plant protein for feeding chickens and pigs. And without feeding chickens and pigs and making eggs and meat, the nutrition of the whole human population would be severely impacted. Well, the other interesting thing is that there is this amazing group, a very small group of people called the Soybean Farmers of America. And through the checkoff program, contribute a small fee on every bushel of soybeans they grow to fund research on improving soybean yields. Because as the population grows, the soybean farmer has to continue to increase the yields at a rate at least equal to population growth, or we enter as a human species into a severe limit in protein. Well, as technical director of a big company who doesn't do any growing in the fields, dealing with soybean farmers who know a lot about soil and rain and plowing and weeds and nematodes. They know a lot about that. What they don't know very much about is how to evaluate research projects from the universities that deal with soil and cultivation and nematodes. So let me tell you about nematodes. I didn't know anything about nematodes either. It's a great word, isn't it? You can almost tell, ooh, right? They're creepy crawly. They are worms, very small worms that attach themselves to the root of the soybean plant and suck it dry. They remove all the nutrients. And so the yield of soybeans is dramatically impacted. So you may sometimes hear that farmers rotate corn and soybeans, right? The reason is that if you grow soybeans too many years in a row in a field, the nematodes take over. And so the way it is controlled is by rotation. So you put the corn in, the nematodes can't find any nutrients and they die off, right? Well, the research projects that come in are from people who understand how critical managing the nematodes is to our total global nutrition. And so the soybean farmers needed someone who could do what I can do, which is evaluate these research projects and help them choose how to invest their, I think I kind of remember they had $500,000 to $1 million, $500,000 to $1 million. I mean, it wasn't tiny. It wasn't the agricultural business either. Okay. So how does one use the seed of the table? Well, here I am at the Cargill table. Here I am at the soybean table. And the thing about it is to show to Cargill why it is important that we as a company that depends on the farmers' yields support them in their efforts to control the biggest single problem with soybeans. Things that I want to say is, I don't know how I got muted.
No, you're okay.
Okay. So one of the things that I want to point out is that the big takeaway of all this is that credibility in one dimension begets credibility and latitude in another, right? So being at the first table of newbies, and then at the soybean table, and then at the soybean farmers table, all of it creates credibility because we don't try to be who you are not. You try to be what is it that you can contribute to this table for the people who are there. Well, the higher the corporate ladder you go, the smaller the table. And so how does one use your seat at the smaller table? Well, the Cargill's Women's Council was created as part of a class action settlement before I joined the company. And suffice to say, it spent its first 10 years of existence looking for purpose. credibility begets credibility and latitude. And the Women's Council, nowhere in my job charter except that I am a woman. But credibility at the table where I was sitting opened the opportunity to actually have impact elsewhere. And very interesting thing that you may not know is that many senior executives today have daughters. And unlike 50 years ago, these daughters are not going to stay home. They are well educated and they are in the job workforce. And these daughters are coming home talking about all the things that we talk about, right? Senior executives have daughters. So the Cargill's Women's Council was one of these interesting opportunities. And my boss at that moment, who was the CFO, had a daughter. And he agreed that the Cargill Women's Council had was in need. So my new friend, Corinne Ricard, who is now an executive at a big fertilizer company, and I independently decided that aimless complaining was a disservice to Cargill women. And her boss also agreed, because it was becoming increasingly clear that some of the best brains in the world showed up as women. So the company cares about employee retention, and the Cargill Women Council cares about the retention. I think, let me start again. The company cares about employee retention, and the Cargill Women's Council cares about the retention of women. So we secured money and an employee time, and we had credibility at the table. And one of the most amazing things that we did was we reviewed all the public materials and training manuals that Cargill was using at that time. Now, it is a very, very small exaggeration, but makes for a good story. There wasn't a woman or a female pronoun anywhere to be found. And this is true. All the pictures had men traders, men engineers. And when you read the training materials, all the case studies were he, right? Well, that's not true today. It's clearly not true today. And in fact, the Women's Council, after we pivoted it, has become a model for a whole array of things that Cargill is doing, because they understand that there is a war going on for talent, and talent exists in many, many places. And so the training materials, the pictures, everything, you will be able to find yourself today. So my doctorate launched an astonishing Cargill career. I have wonderful stories. Everything that I could have anticipated. And when I graduated at my retirement party, the nicest thing that was said, I would like to share with you. So a woman said to my friend, the corporate vice president of operations, and I will tell you, he sat at a much smaller table than I was sitting at. He was a very important man. She said, you know, Ron, every woman in Cargill knows Carol. Nobody knows you.